Hello, it's Paul and my motley crew with me, and we're going to take a look at some more Talend work at Yale, and how specifically the question was asked is how is MFT logic handled. Probably the biggest piece and component is the get MFT file, and that's under Workday right here. There's this service called get MFT Files, and I'm going to open that up. And this service, get MFT Files, is the logic that does all of the work, and it's got actually some pretty interesting specifics to it. First of all, you have to understand that the MFT files with the prefix as they come through. Maybe I can even open up MFT real quick. Hang on, I'll pause. Okay, so this job, get MFT files, basically we have copies of this job in the various projects. So one risk that we have is potentially that somebody may change this reusable service across different projects, and sometimes the requirements for this get MFT is slightly different. But what happens is there's logic dealing with context variables that figure out which server to get. It gets a file listing of all of the files that begin a certain way. So if you look here, for example, here's in FileZilla, you can see how a file name here, like YUHRI 1160 academic affiliates out, a date stamp, and even a timestamp .xml. This one here says .done, means it's already been processed. But wait, what's important to understand, maybe it hasn't really been processed all the way. .done really just means that we have successfully pulled the file down. The job in Talend, we really don't know, based upon this naming convention, that the job actually got processed correctly. So we know that the get MFT part of the process ran successful. Here, as an example, you can see 1157 .xml. There's no .done. That file is still out there. So what happens is you need to understand which file, or process this file. You'll see a context variable called process this file, which is kind of passed around the name and is kind of created to know what to get and what to do. One of the little tricky pieces of logic that we did add in here was to determine if it will only get files that are only a couple of days old. And I believe that's set in a context variable. And let me hunt down. If I remember correctly, is that right here, max days. We had a situation where what we do is we will only pull down a file that is 1 day old. So what happens is the list file is basically going to do a select against the directory, the FTP directory, based upon the prefix. So if we were looking for a file called Paul and then a date stamp, so it would be Paul, today's date, Paul tomorrow's date, Paul the next date, but even Paul date timestamp, we're going to get all of the Paul files, or all of the 1031 files in this case, and we're going to make sure they don't say .done. But because of this max days, we're only going to look at the files that are 1 day old or less. We had a situation where we thought that we had renamed everything to .done. We had renamed everything to .done, and the XML file here was actually, last modified date was older than one max day, so it never pulled it down. So what we actually had to do is we had to rename the date of the file, that the date actually has to be less than 1 day from the day you're processing it. So the real practical understanding of this is, say for instance, you want to process a file that's in production from 3 weeks ago, or 3-4 days ago. You pull that file from production, you put it on the MFT server and process it down. It won't get picked up, because what happens is its max days is greater than 1. So that's just a little caveat here. So what happens is we connect to MFT, we get a file list. We then sort the list, and once we get the list sorted here, We then here's to calculate how old stuff is, and then ultimately we figure out what file we're going to get, and then we actually get this file. So this little service here says, I've got a list of 1031s. I'm going to sort them in order by the date stamp, which is a part of the name, and I'm going to determine which ones are less than 1 day old, and I'm going to get the most recent one. I'm going to then physically FTP it down, SFTP it down, and then I'm going to rename it to .done. Again, .done only means I got the file successfully. So when we talk about the get MFT files, this is the logic that's happening. Now what's key is there is this max days piece, and then this process this file. Process this file by default is NA. We just don't know what the file name is until you send the file name into the service. So the parent job that says, oh, I have to go get something, will send the name into the service to say, when you're using 1031s, we're going to get the 1031 / whatever date stamp. So this and so that the process,
also the triggering process
sends the prefix. Exactly. The triggering process sends the prefix, so we can reuse this service with the same logic. Also, and notice here that Mac is version 2 has the max day logic and no file found logic. We added logic that if no file was found with that prefix, we basically didn't want to bomb out because it was erroring. And then we also added the error handling and email logic. You've seen in the other video that we always have a pre-job with a set email context, and we have error handling logic that will send the custom Yale mail. Again, I can't reiterate this enough. If you do a job in Talend for the ICC group, every single service, child service, grandchild, great-great-grandchild, for the history of all of ICC, always needs to have this component of the setting the email context variable and, at bare minimum, the failure that upon an error that we send out the standardized email error messages. And we also have a key send mail success if the logic business rules say go ahead and send a success email. Yes, what we really are trying to do is get as many emails into our boss's email box as possible. So now, let's take a look. Let's go back. We were looking at populate staging daily. That job runs once a night. And with that, this job is a parallelized job. It kicks out 6 different jobs all at once. And we're going to focus here on the IIQ organization, the 1097 file. And if I remember correctly, there probably is a 1097 right here. So you can see that there's a YUHR 1097. And notice that there's no .done here. So this file never got picked up. And so that file did not get processed. So let's look at that process file. Now, if we look at the organization, what I did over here when I created these, I created folders, an organization folder, an affiliates folder, academic units folder. Now, in general, I have a populate and process. My reasoning and thinking was process is the starting of let's do this process, let's do this work. Populate is the meat behind it that actually does the populating of the staging and the BBO tables. So this process, IIQ Organization 1097, again, has the pre-job for context variables, has the error handling. At one time, it just used to be these 3 jobs. It's using the get MFT file. Now, the get MFT here, if you take a look, there's this thing called get file mask. Get file mask is the beginning of the file that we want to pass into the get MFT piece. So get file mask says, get me all the YUHR 1097 organization data out asterisk. So this is doing the select, right here is the MFT of right here. Get file mask says, give me all the files that look like this. And obviously the dot star, the asterisk here, in the context variable, The dot star in the context variable is the piece that gets us what we need. I messed up. So now, this parent job in the context variable is setting that, where did I lost it? Get file mask right here. Sorry, and table is there. There we go. So when you create a new job and you need to get a file from MFT, you need this get file mask to determine the select. Unless you know, of course, the actual file name itself, you just pass in the whole file name and just get that file directly. Now what happens is we've gotten that file, and get file mask, once the file has actually been FTP'd down, this Java component here basically creates modifies the context variable, process this file to have the real name of the file. So remember, we had a header in that file, but we had this date stamp. So this here is now creating the whole file name, including the directory path. So now that we've gotten the file, we determine the full path of that file. And again, this is the job for organization. We then go to the organization, the populate. And the populate is kind of the meat of the job. This is just, let's get the file ready and staged. Now what happens is, again, same standardized error handling logic on all services. We need this XML file. This XML file, how do we know which XML file to get? We're getting that XML file from context process this file. Context process this file was created back at this job, right here at this job. Context process this file. And that was determined by the file that was actually pulled down and placed into a certain local directory from the get MFTs. So from here, the meat of the job says, I know where my XML input is coming from. My XML input is coming from process this file. Process this file, that variable was created, that name was populated from the full data string, as well as the header, as well as the actual file name that was pulled down. Then from here, this is basically simple Talend 101, is that we have a XML file that's got our standard, the elements to the XML. It gets mapped. It gets mapped in just a standardized way. There's the innies, and there's the outies that are going to go to a database. Thing popped up a little big on me here. And then so the innies and the outies get mapped. And so this is coming from the XML from context process this file. And then basically that stream ends up going right to WD organizations. Now in this case here, WD organizations is a table, and I believe in this case it's the DDO table. So here organizations are going, because it's a full load, going right to the DDO schema and not the staging schema. In some cases what we do is, because we'll truncate, you can see here, we're truncating the table and going right to the DDO table. It's a full load. If it's a partial load, like a delta or something like that, what we do is we load a staging table, and then we have a merge procedure. So what we would do is we would have a icon here that says staging DB, whatever it is, run a process, and it would all end up in the DDO table. So I hope this has been of help, a high-level, very quick Reader's Digest view of how the process end-to-end from the files work, especially with the MFT piece. A couple of the key things to remember is, how does it know which file to get to process this XML? It's from context process this file. From there, how does it determine that? It determined that, here's the run of that, it determined that from this Java piece of code, which basically is the answer of the MFT job. The answer of the MFT job, it was, once it finally figured out which file to get, but that started basically from the context of the file mask, get file mask, which got pushed in the first place from the job that started in the very first place here. I believe that that's an ini somewhere, if I remember correctly. Right here is get file mask. This set has a context variable in that parent job. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And there'll be a quiz on this next week.
Okay.